It is an absolute disgrace how Doug Ford kisses Mark Carney's ass at absolutely every opportunity he has to do so. He's supposed to be a conservative, but he's only a conservative in name only. It just goes to show you how weak, pathetic, and soft the Conservative Party of Canada has become with one of the most prominent premiers in Doug Ford. Cozies up, and you can say, oh, he's playing politics. He's just trying to build a relationship with the Prime Minister so that he can create jobs in Ontario. What a joke. This is not normal political pandering. He gushes over Carney every time he speaks about him. He's supposed to be the Conservative Premier of the most prominent economic engine in Canada, and you're telling me this is how he fights Carney? This is how he fights Trudeau? It's pathetic. First of all, it just goes to show there is no opposition. Second of all, Dumbo could have done a better job of navigating these tariffs than Carney and Ford have. Ford ran out a $75 million ad in the States. I kid you not, $75 million total spend in a country where 2 million people are using food banks. Housing rentals are unaffordable as they've ever been. You're going to spend $75 million on an ad that antagonizes the party currently in power in the U.S. How stupid is that? But they roll this ad out, and Ford made it clear today. Carney signed off on the ad, of course. I'm sure they were at each other's chalet, as Ford likes to say. I was with Carney at the chalet. Totally sick to hear the leader of the Conservative Party speaking like Carney in this manner. I was up at the chalet. They signed off on the ad. Of course, Trump sees the ad, an ad that plays Reagan quotes from 55 years ago. How can you possibly contextualize quotes from 55 years ago on tariffs? The world has changed so radically. Puts it out criticizing tariffs from Reagan. As I said, out of context, Ford is now being sued by the Reagan Foundation for misuse of Reagan's words. But Trump sees that, and now in addition to the 35% tariff that is on a lot of major Canadian industries, every industry outside of the USMCA, which, by the way, Carney had absolutely nothing to do with negotiating. Everything outside of the USMCA, our master negotiator, Mark Carney, has 35% tariffs on for Canada. And now Trump has just announced an additional 10% tariff. So 45% tariffs on all products outside of the USMCA in Canada. We already have a 7.1% unemployment rate, the second highest in the G7, 22% unemployment rate among young males, a truly shocking number. And now in Canada, we have these massive tariffs, and it's because our government cannot get it through their thick skulls. The Canadian government uniquely does a terrible job negotiating with the U.S. because unlike every country that has a leader with two brain cells to rub together, who understands that the way to deal with a man like Donald Trump is clearly to let him know how it's going to be mutually beneficial. Canada has a lot of aluminum. Canada has a lot of steel that the United States needs. Make it play up how the United States can benefit from a trade deal with Canada. Do not antagonize this man. He clearly does not react well to being mocked, to being called out. So what do Carney and Ford do that? And by the way, Carney, the most two-faced guy you've ever seen. It's embarrassing. He is kissing Trump's ass every time he's in person with him. And then behind his back, he'll talk crap. So disgusting and such worm behavior. But they're running these massive ads, and Trump has gone out of his way, as well as his team. If you look at senior economic advisors speaking today, they say that Canada is specifically difficult to deal with because they antagonize, and the Canadian people are not surprised whatsoever. The Liberal Party of Canada wants to be able to blame the horrific situation that our country is in all on Donald Trump. Like I said, the Canadian economy is in tatters after a decade of Justin Trudeau's green policies. Whether you look at the unemployment rate, the youth unemployment rate, the number of jobs, $63 billion left from the economy just from the time that Carney was elected Prime Minister. 1.6% fall in GDP in Carney's first quarter. GDP per capita falling 6 quarters in a row. 6 quarters in a row. The Canadian economy is in tatters. We are paying out more to immigrants than we are to Canadians who have spent their entire life here and are now on disability getting $870 a month. It's disgusting. We have a government of traitors, a government who literally prioritizes housing and feeding immigrants over people of ancestors who fought and defended for this country. It is the definition of traitorous is what this government is. But our dire financial situation has absolutely zero to do with Donald Trump. It's not Donald Trump. This is just a convenient scapegoat to say, oh, it's because of the tariffs. No, can you pull out a little bit, pull out and look macro? The Canadian economy is in such tatters because we refuse to export our LNG. We refuse to export our oil. There's so many natural resources in this incredible country that could easily be used to have a burgeoning and economic superpower. Canada has so much fresh water, so many capabilities, but these green initiatives, which Mark Carney himself has admitted on several occasions on podcasts, make him and his buddies at Brookfield Asset Management rich as hell. And somebody should really look into the fact that Mark Carney is just blatantly shouting out companies like GE Hitachi in his press conferences that he has a known financial interest in. Mark Carney is out in front of the press flouting the law. It is clearly illegal for the Prime Minister of Canada to be talking about companies like GE Hitachi as specific financial interest in, yet he continues to do it. These green scams that see the Canadian economy teeter because a country that produces 1.5 to 2% of total global emissions has to somehow heroically throw their economy aside to save the planet, when the fact is that China contributes 33% of emissions worldwide. If you're going to make any impact, if the Canadian government was interested in making any impact whatsoever, we would say let's export LNG to China, where it's 50% cleaner than coal, which they're currently using. But does the Canadian government do that? No, because they're not actually interested in the climate. These buzzwords like sustainability, what they're actually used for is tools to make them money and control the population. What's going to come in is going to be digital IDs, central digital banking currencies, where if you go over your allotment of so-called carbon emissions for the day, or for the whatever the period of time is, you can't start your car or you can't eat meat. It's always with communism. It always winds up in authoritarianism, total control. But the idea that the United States is to blame for the current economic situation in Canada is a total farce, a total joke. And I hope this latest in what has been a ridiculous, never-ending series of gaffes by the government of Canada in these trade negotiations with the U.S., where Carney ran on, I'm the guy who can get these negotiations done. I'm the guy who will get the best deal for Canadians, because that's fundamentally who they're supposed to be working for. We all know they're not, but they're supposed to have as first priority the Canadian people, which clearly they're not. Letting 8 million people in the country in a decade, when every single major economist up until 10 years ago told you what a fucking disaster that was going to be. And it's pathetic. It's pathetic. But don't be tricked by them selling it as Doug Ford is fighting for Canadians. If Doug Ford and Mark Carney were really fighting for Canadians, they'd be negotiating like serious people. They'd be telling Donald Trump how they can reach a mutually beneficial deal instead of all this baiting with $75 billion of taxpayer money. Please like, share, subscribe, join, become a member, grab some gear, donate. Really appreciate everybody who supports. Thank you so much. We're going to take this country back.